The evolution of WoW graphics went from
5 polygon models
to dynamic weather effects and super expressive faces. It's astonishing to see how basically the old Warcraft 3 engine evolved into what you see currently, and you're going to see it all today, packed up with some tech leaps not even we knew about. Alpha World of Warcraft set the stage for a lot bigger things to come. And hey, we can all appreciate the roots, even if those roots look filthy and rotten to the core. Sorry, I might have been talking about the female no model, but clearly a lot of stuff is incomplete, and as we know, not everything made it into the live game eventually. The first iteration of WoW's engine was made from the actual Warcraft 3 engine, and that translated quite a lot into the visuals of the MMO. I mean, it's one thing to see those models and effects from a bird's eye view like in the strategy game, it's another to get down among them and cringe at the details. Spell animations from Alpha were slightly different and polished once the game launched, and dances. I mean, this looks fine, but we ended up with the Macarena for the human female as an example. That and a lot of textures were eventually improved for ground effects. Possibly the biggest changes were the character models. Very early look at the trolls, orcs, and taurens can cause nightmares in the younger audience, please be advised. Clearly the menu and character screens received massive upgrades, but still we have to appreciate the fact that these were not the final race models we ended up with, because holy goddamn shit. Overall, the production of the game did feel a bit rushed even when vanilla launched in 2004. The overall graphics were inferior for its era and put a lot of people off, from the textures of trees and bushes all the way to some critter models. Obviously, from the alpha we received massive improvements, but with the focus of accessibility for most machines at the time, vanilla WoW kept a low polygon count, which resulted in blocky looking characters and landscapes. The texture resolution was fairly low, giving off blurry and unappealing textures at times, more to do with the memory and storage constraints for the era's PC specs. The lighting and shadows were also very simplistic. You can even see an improvement between vanilla and the current classic servers, let alone Dragonflight. The animations for the characters were limited and clearly antiquated compared to the present-day Dragonflight variations. The art style of vanilla WoW was intentionally stylized to accommodate the hardware limitations, which also meant that the game's visuals were not as realistic or detailed as what players might expect from contemporary games. The Burning Crusade launched in early 2007, and for its time, the graphical improvements introduced helped to elevate the visual quality of the game and create a more immersive experience for players. As for the environment, TBC introduced the new continent of Outland, which featured stunning and otherworldly landscapes. The environments were more detailed, colorful, and diverse, providing players with a fresh and visually captivating experience. The disconnect from the original world was also strong, with Outland being very cosmic, broken, and magically floating in the twisting nether compared to vanilla's grounded depiction of continents, islands, and mountains. Overall, the expansion utilized higher resolution textures for everything, resulting in a better world and characters, but also improved upon the lighting and shadows together with a better visual for the water and weather effect. 2008 marked the release of Wrath of the Lich King, to this day the most critically acclaimed expansion. The environments in Northrend took a big up in overall textures and models. They were more diverse, detailed, and expansive, offering players a visually stunning and atmospheric experience, possibly the most immersive zones they have ever made to this day. Both player characters and NPCs received more nuanced facial expressions and lifelike movements, improving overall visual storytelling, but also adding once again to the immersion factor. Together with the environment, the higher resolution textures were clearly a significant upgrade and likely contributed heavily to the overall appreciation of the expansion. Note here that the capabilities of the graphic cards and processors were also starting to really accelerate, and this was quite evident on the improvements in Wrath and even more evident in expansions to follow. One of the most impactful spell and ability effects received was the fire effect that was showcased early in such dungeons as Utgard Pinnacle, a feat that was of course accompanied by more advanced lighting and shading, creating more realistic and immersive lighting effects even for a game such as World of Warcraft. This added depth and atmosphere to the game world, especially in the darker and shadowy areas. Water rendering also was further enhanced, making bodies of water look even more realistic and reflective. Water effects in this expansion contributed to the overall visual spectacle, particularly in zones with icy landscapes and frozen lakes, which were made even more impressive with the incorporated atmospheric effects, falling snow and blizzards in Northrend, adding to the wintry theme of the expansion. Wrath of the Lich King introduced a new technology called phasing, which allowed for dynamic changes in the game world based on players' progression in certain quests or storylines. This feature added a new layer of immersion and impacted the player's experience, showcasing how the game's graphics adapted to reflect changing circumstances. All of this culminated with a detailed raid and dungeon design featuring epic and grandiose architecture, adding to the sense of adventure and challenge. At the peak of its popularity, World of Warcraft took a bold turn with Cataclysm in 2010 by completely revamping the old world we call Azeroth. New terrain, quest hubs, and revamped zones were improved with better environmental details and terrain textures, making the first and only time in WoW's history when the old worlds were completely revitalized. Since then, we have had changes to old quests here and there, but nothing to this scale, shaking the very foundations of what players grew up with, especially for those that started in vanilla WoW. Water rendering was further enhanced, making water bodies appear more realistic and visually appealing. Additionally, weather effects like rain, snow, and sandstorms were improved, contributing heavily to the immersion of the game world. As for the characters, they continued to be refined and enhanced with better models, textures, and animations, together with new spell and ability effects, offering more variety and visual impact during gameplay, especially when going into the new dungeons and raids, which featured more intricate and visually impressive design, immersive environments, and challenging encounters that were even more emphasized with the boosted phasing technology, having all of the zones change based on the player's quest progression. The two new races introduced, Worgens and Goblins, were the first ones to use a more complex rig with added polygons, resulting in a clear visual distinction from all the other races and laying the ground for what was to come in Mists of Pandaria. And that happened in 2012 when we first saw the Pandaren models. Rigging and polygon count increased even further, resulting in some of the most fluid combat animations and an incredible facial expression palette, which was quite impressive at the time. We went from faces having a couple of textures, moved to faces having particular parts and bumps, eyes, cheeks moving naturally. The expansion would eventually receive praise for its beautiful environment, engaging character animations, and overall visual polish, contributing to the ongoing success of the game. The expansion featured an art direction influenced by Asian culture and aesthetics. This unique art style extended to the architecture, landscapes, and character designs, providing players with a fresh and visually distinct experience. It added new creature models and animations with an emphasis on detail and realism. Creatures in Pandaria showcased more expressive movements and lifelike behaviors, breathing more life into the open world. The expansion utilized advanced particle effects, adding more visual flair to spells and abilities and environmental effects. The improvement was also visible with better water rendering, better reflections, and realistic movements in Pandaria's lakes, rivers, and coastal areas. With improved lighting and atmospheric changes as time progressed, contributed to a more immersive world. And let's not forget that some of the most epic moments in the expansion took advantage of not only the upgraded phasing technology with the Siege of Orgrimmar event that destroyed a whole zone almost, but one of the largest raids ever made that took place on so many levels of Pandaria, Durotar, Orgrimmar, and a whole city underneath the Orc capital. Warlords of Draenor came out in 2014 and was, to this day, the single biggest upgrade to the overall world environment when it comes to textures. The landscapes in Draenor were richly detailed, featuring more complex terrain elements and environmental assets that gave the game an incredible, fresh, and modern feeling compared to Mists of Pandaria. This was accompanied by the first major character model updates. This massive overhaul of character models for some of the original races in the game revolutionized the visual presentation of the game. People saw the Worgens and Goblins. They were blown away by the Pandaren, and they wanted the same treatment to the OG races in the game. Both Alliance and Horde races, including orcs and humans, received significant updates to their models, making them more detailed and appealing, especially with the facial expressions that made the past expansions almost unrecognizable. The new texture technology for the world was probably best represented through the garrison system. Every building, every wall, every fence and door was boosted in terms of their resolution and overall visual quality, and stood as a precedent for future architectural changes the game would have in the following years. Possibly the most ambitious expansion ever made to this day was Legion, which released in 2016. Every feature added, it came with a visual upgrade to pretty much everything. In terms of character animations and spell effects, the best example would be the new hero class Demon Hunter. They came with unique visual effects, particularly their metamorphosis abilities and use of fell magic. The introduction of artifact weapons was accompanied by improved textures for items in general. Not only did the new weapons look more striking and detailed, but the technology was used for the armors as well, while the garrison technology from Warlords of Draenor was used to create and improve player hubs in the form of the class order halls. Each and every one of the class order halls had a distinct flavor, emphasized with upgraded textures and particle effects. Legion added more dynamic weather effects, making the game world feel more alive and responsive to changing conditions while out in the open world, as well as an increase in draw distance, which was something that has evolved over the years with each passing expansion to what it ended up back then. And of course, the dungeons and raids received massive improvements to their architecture and overall visual appeal. 2018 marked the release of Battle for Azeroth and the start of a major backlash from the players in terms of the expansion's reception. Whether this contributed to the visual presentation of the expansion is unknown. Suffice to say that BFA at the very least improved on a lot of aspects. It was also the first expansion where we received allied races, where the devs took big liberties in character models even when using older rigs from other races for their respective animations. It also continued to improve character models and animations, adding more details, smoother movements and enhanced facial expressions for better visual storytelling. On top of the improved textures and some of the most visually striking skyboxes, BFA came with dynamic weather changes and environmental hazards, adding to the immersive experience. But for all its praises, it had some of the most unforgivable visual representation of a zone that ended up being the final raid. And yes, I am talking about the Nyalotha JPEG skybox. The raid felt like it took 2 steps back from the step forward the expansion made in terms of graphical design, which is a shame because the previous raids were incredible, and not to mention Nazjatar was an artistic marvel in terms of immersing the player in an underwater zone that was sucked dry out of the sea so we can explore it. Shadowlands, the black sheep of WoW expansions, made its debut with one of the most ambitious skybox changes, as if to make up for the JPEG it left us with in 8.3. Not only that, the new zones were entirely taken from what seemed to be a different game in terms of their visual aspect. They were heavily themed to their story and artistic depiction of whatever fantasy concept they were conveying in terms of death. Whether it was the vampiric Venthyr in Revendreth, the druidic Ardenwold forests, the undead machinations of Maldraxxus, or the heavenly afterlife of Bastion, each zone was polished with a color palette, unique textures resonating in the ground, flora and fauna to further immerse the player in their pocket world. The art direction, whether questionable or not, cannot be understated on how much it improved from BFA. With the Covenants being introduced, the player received access to a whole new package of spell animations and effects themed towards each individual zone and associated party. In terms of hardware improvements, by supporting DirectX 12 and ray tracing, World of Warcraft's graphics were further improved in Shadowlands, providing players with more stunning visuals and enhancing their overall gaming experience. Shadowlands continued to refine character models and animations, adding more detail and improved facial expressions, making characters appear more lifelike. It brought new environmental effects such as dynamic weather changes, particle effects, and atmospheric enhancement, all tying up in some of the most ambitious raid designs in terms of effects, texture quality, and yeah, even skyboxes. It did suffer from from palette consistency, where at times it served them well with the Nathria raid, and other times it would be counterproductive with the Sanctum of Domination raid. For all its visual technological upgrades, the reception of some of the artistic choices left a lot to be desired, from the atmosphere to the color choices to paint the zones in what would have been their accurate artistic depiction. The biggest counterpoint to their chosen color palette would be the Korthia zone, which remains to this day the most depressing and disliked zone ever made, and it had most to do with its graphical presentation. In fairness, Zereth Mortis, although artistically questionable, spiced up the color palette and lighting of their zones together with its accompanying raid, breathing a breath of fresh air into the game. The choice in architecture might not have resonated with everyone, but it would be undoubtedly unique and clearly an upgrade, at least in the texture and particle effects department. And with that, we come to the present day with 2022's Dragonflight expansion. The first and most obvious change was the player UI. Although in the past this has received minor improvements from texture to icons, now it was completely scrapped and redone from ground up, adding another graphical element from WoW's history to the modern visual bucket. At the time of making this video, the team is continuously improving the in-game assets and graphical design of the interface, together with spell effects for classes left behind, and likely more to come by the end of the expansion. With the strikingly beautiful new zones came an even higher draw distance and water effects. The improvement on the environment textures allowed the devs an increase in freedom when it comes to visually designing unique zones with more vibrant colors, completely contrasting the somber feeling players were left with in Shadowlands. The flora and fauna of the Dragon Isles blend naturally with each other from the use of logical color palettes. And in terms of zone design, the Zaralek Cavern has brought with itself an innovative way of creating terrain into already existing assets, with a seamless transition between the surface and the underground. The improvement to the character models came as a package deal with a new race, the Drakthir, that had more options for customization than any other race in the past. Once again, its artistic design being overall questionable. The theme of the expansion being heavily focused on vibrant colors is not only visible in the new race and class, with new spell effects, animations, and dynamic character movements, but also for all the customizations the players can interact with, from hair colors to dragon riding mounts, which on their own came as well with a new flying system that expands on the player's perspective on space and speed by cleverly manipulating the landscape to give the feeling of a high-octane dragon ride. The benefits of being a live game for almost 20 years has given World of Warcraft one of the most impressive visual journeys any media has undergone. Jam-packed with nostalgia, emotions, wonder, and excitement, the art team has continuously surprised people with better and better graphical assistance to contribute to their fun out in the world. And to have even more fun, it's not enough to simply be engrossed in the visual aspect of the game, but also a much more crucial thing is ignored by too many people when it comes to the enjoyment of the game. Find out what took the fun out of WoW, or at least one of the biggest reasons the fun was squashed, and how to get it back right here. See this? Here, click it.